Has there ever been a movie that you've heard nothing but praise for, that you felt for certain wasn't as good as people were claiming, as if there was no way a movie could be that good, but when you went to see it, you were surprised to find it actually did live up to the hype? This is not one of those times. Spider-Man. Everyone likes Spider-Man, and Sony most certainly knows it. On and off for about a decade, ever since Captain America Civil War and the explosion in superhero popularity following the MCU, Spider-Man has been the go-to character for new fans to be introduced to. And it's easy to see why. He's very relatable. He's a kid who's struggling being a hero and growing up. He's awkward, he's poor, and his uncle is dead. But with Marvel getting more popular and the writers wanting to make characters
updated for modern audiences,
they decided they'd switch it up by replacing Peter Parker with Miles Morales, a character whose entire existence boils down to being black, replacing Peter Parker in spin-off stories where his life is better, his parents are alive, sometimes his uncle is too. He's rich enough to afford private school, everyone likes him, but somehow has no friends, and he's better than Peter Parker in every way. And this movie sure isn't about to change any of that. Across the Spider-Verse, like its predecessor, was all over the internet when it came out. There was hardly a forum or social media site you could go to that didn't have some post or discussion about it. And at first glance, it's pretty easy to see why. Spider-Verse was colorful with its own new style of animation, and was often described as an animated comic book. It's based around characters that are generally popular, and was riding a wave of interest in all things Spider-Man during a time where a lot of people were starting to feel significant superhero fatigue. The entire movie is full of the sort of art that dares you not to look at it. I describe it as, for lack of a better term, as loud. There was always just so much going on that there's no way you'll catch every little detail the first time you watch it. And frankly, I'm surprised there hasn't been reports of it causing seizures, because the artists sure do try. Good animation, or at least interesting animation, doesn't actually mean quality overall. The movie does have more than a few errors, inconsistencies, or just straight up mistakes in it. Most of the time, it's in the form of continuity errors in its animation, which is surprising with how much effort they seem to have put into it. And other times, it's in the decisions people make right after something happens that makes their decisions seem either stupid or socially inept at best. For example, near the beginning of the movie, Gwen is this very confident, somewhat experienced Spider-Woman, even bantering with Spider-Man 2099 right away, all while fighting the Vulture. But when the pregnant Spider-Woman appears, she asks her to adopt her like a Tumblr artist meeting her favorite feminist writer, when there's less than 4 sentences said between the two of them. Now, I'm going to ascribe it most likely to the attempt to be comedic, because that's a staple of the Spider-Man style of story. But at the same time, this movie tries to be very serious, and even during serious moments, characters will burst out typical Marvel dialogue, but unlike prime MCU dialogue, where you can fit a tension-breaking joke in without sacrificing the seriousness of the scene too much, this movie does it at almost every opportunity, either as a way to humiliate a male character, normally being Miguel or Peter. It ends up not even taking itself seriously when you think it would be taking itself seriously the most. Another issue that appears multiple times is that despite this group of supposed experienced or even elite Spider-Men, who are variants of a hero that in most iterations tend to not just be superpowered but also smart, highly athletic, and more than willing to put themselves in harm's way or make sacrifices for the greater good. But this movie makes almost every one of the variants at best 3 out of those 5 qualities. The only character I would say hits all these points is Miguel, who the movie spends almost the entirety of his screen time trying to make you hate, despite him clearly being right constantly, and the only one taking the job seriously, especially when it comes to the introduction of the canon and the effects of messing with it. With the introduction of the canon, it both sets up the stakes of this movie, but also is set up in such a way that it clearly doesn't understand the consequences of using a multiversal, interconnected storyline to justify its plot. 2 of the live-action Spider-Man series have had 0 dead captains involved in their story, which is something they established in this is supposed to be part of literally every single story. And they even make a passing mention against the Spider-Man of the MCU, so it's not as if for whatever reason the MCU Spider-Man just is not included with this, while also having the Andrew Garfield one included in. And even if that weren't the the case, the fact that this story involves the existence of a multiverse, which by its definition is infinite, that means that there are infinite number of Spider-Mans that don't have dead captains or even dead uncles associated with them in their story. So this very premise doesn't work even with the rules it establishes, which is a problem that is not exclusive to this. It's a recurring problem with just about any property that introduces multiverses and set stories. The movie very much wants to explore the Spider-Verse itself and show off its colorful cast of variants. Right off the bat, the movie focuses on expanding the scope of variants not just for Spider-Man, but also his villains, with the first fight being between Miguel, Spider-Pregnant, and a version of the Vulture. From hereafter, for about a third of the movie, we are exploring alternate Spider-Man, which, personally, I think is what contributes to its ending being left on a cliffhanger. So much of this movie is just the cast talking about them being Spider-Man and trying to give a significant portion of the movie time to focus on each of them individually, like it's a TV show and the variants are a star that's a guest for the individual episode. This ends up just dragging the movie down significantly. We don't even get to Miles and his story until over 20 minutes into the movie itself, despite him being supposedly the main character, because they decided to focus on Gwen from the outset, and after that it's about 10 minutes of him juggling being a hero and a kid, then 40 minutes spending time with Gwen and meeting the other variants before the movie remembers he's supposed to be dealing with his villain. But after that, the rest of the movie is setting up rules for the Spider-Verse, introducing other variants, the rest of the team, and then Miles not listening to the people making everything worse for himself, so the next movie can have the actual plot that should have been in this movie. The movie feels like the first 4 or 5 episodes of a miniseries mashed together, because so much of its pacing slows down to focus on the subplots or side characters that aren't actually relevant to the plot as much as it wants you to think they are. 2 of the variants disappear not long after Gwen takes Miles to meet Miguel, but then they had 20 minutes just dedicated to focusing on them and treating them like they were going to be important to the rest of the movie just to have them disappear. It makes no sense whatsoever, and only one of them can really be said to even contribute somewhat to the plot itself. You could cut out almost half of the entire movie and it wouldn't affect the plot. You might even be able to fit the entirety of whatever actual plot is going to happen in the next movie and still keep the original runtime for this one. As far as plots go, this movie has a pretty simple one, not something that needs tons of side segments or world building to understand. It's very much Miles' personal solo outing for the first time, whereas the previous movie was very much him learning how to be Spider-Man, or just at least the basics, and even then, there's an argument that he takes to it a little too easy.
Beginning, middle, end. Facts, details, condense, plot, tell it.
Our story begins with 20 minutes of Gwen time. It's very standard Spider-Man stuff. Her version of Peter dies because every Peter is a loser in this series for some reason. Her dad is a cop and doesn't like Spider-Woman. He finds out she's Spider-Woman and immediately tries to arrest her, though more than a decade of raising his child meant nothing to him. He's just ready to toss her ass into the clink. Then we get to Miles, who's really more focused on being Spider-Man rather than secure his future, and the movie sets up this conundrum for him, where people are telling him how his story is supposed to go, which, as the movie goes on, we'll learn he rejects this idea and wants to do his own thing by cribbing off of Peter's legacy as Spider-Man, because Miles would rather take shortcuts than put effort into literally anything. Then the movie spends a long time introducing the villain and trying to make him seem like he's Miles' first real nemesis, with a personal connection to him, but also frames him as a bumbling idiot who not only can't control his powers, but he also falls over himself the entire time and can barely fight as it is. And it's not till near the very end of the movie does the villain get treated as a serious threat or like a character to be taken seriously at all. And it feels like 2 different versions of the character from 2 different movies by the end. By the end of the movie, it doesn't even feel like a proper to be continued moment. And about half of the movie is dedicated to setting up the sequel and the basic rules of the universe that certainly should have been done much earlier in the movie or even in the previous movie. But instead, they use that time to set up Miles and Gwen's eventual love story and give Gwen her own prologue sequence, which more than anything, it feels like they're trying to set up a spin-off for Gwen. If that is what they're going to do, why not just make her own movie instead of putting it in with Miles, at that point you're trying to not only do too many stories at once, you just simply don't have the time to do all the ones you want to do, even with this whole expanded cast. When they finally do decide to get to the main plot point of it, we are given out the outline of the basic rules of this universe. And they're generally pretty simple. There are infinite universes, and each one has its own Spider-Man. Ignore the fact that that isn't how Infinity works. Each of the Spider-Man has what's called canon events, things that have to happen in each story. The whole thing is depicted very nicely and succinctly with a flashback from Miguel. And if those events don't happen, the entirety of the respective universe will be destroyed. It just stops existing and falls apart. Just like your marriage. All this is explained to us by Miguel after he points out to Miles that the reason why he doesn't have a particularly favorable view of him is primarily because Miles has now created two events that break canon somewhere at some point. The first event is him getting bit by a spider from a different universe that, as a result, does not have a Spider-Man. And all of this takes place shortly after a conflict with the Spot where Miles ends up disrupting another canon event, where he ends up saving Spider-Jeet's girlfriend's dad, and a giant hole in reality appears. But what's weird about this is, not only does the hole just appear, like floating in mid-air, but the giant piece of the structure that fell down, that they were trying to stop, just keeps on going. Like, you can clearly tell when you watch the scenes that it hasn't hit the ground yet. There's still very much several layers of, or at least one layer left of city for it to fall through, but they just ignore that for some reason. Miguel also hopefully explains to us that Miles being Spider-Man at all is breaking the canon continuously because he's not supposed to be Spider-Man at all. He is literally just a walking disruption to the canon and is therefore dangerous. I have a nasty feeling that this is going to be paid off not at all, or is going to be completely hand-waved by the end of the next movie. Now, the catalyst for the big conflict between Miles as well as Miguel and the rest of the Spider-Man is that Miles' dad is about to become a captain in the police force, and part of the canon events is that a captain in a police force that has a connection in some way or another to Spider-Man dies. Miles figures out that since he's already had the part of the story where his uncle dies, a captain close to him is going to die next, and comes to the conclusion that his dad is about to die because he's the only one who's even close to being a captain in his life. Which, side note, not only is Miles' dad not high enough rank to be promoted to captain, he isn't even a proper officer. Based on the symbol on his shoulder compared to the actual ranks of the police officers in the NYPD that I could find, Miles' dad holds the rank of nothing. He's missing 2/3 of the symbol for sergeant, and even if he was a sergeant, he'd first have to pass the test to become a lieutenant, then he'd have to take and pass the test to become a captain. And that would also mean either he's being moved somewhere into a different precinct, or his current captain is about to leave his position. So not only would he be skipping a rank, what's really strange is just that they ignored the part where he's not actually a lieutenant, and somehow they think that they're just going to let him skip a rank. This was a very easy detail that they could have avoided. I don't know why they didn't make sure that this detail was addressed before releasing the movie. It seems like a very basic oversight. After a very long and drawn out chase sequence where Miguel manages to catch up to Miles while he's on a space elevator, and once again explains that if Miles messes with the canon, he will literally be killing an entire universe of people, but for some reason, Miles doesn't care about that. Miles thinks that his dad's life and his personal comfort are more important than literally everyone else in his universe. Since Miles just told everyone around him that he wants to effectively commit mass murder, they rightly try to stop him, and Miles learns that his friends who work for a group that prevents the exact thing he's trying to do have talked about and seriously considered trying to prevent him from saving his dad so everyone else in his universe doesn't die. And Miles somehow gets it in his mind that makes them villains, and then he tries to guilt them for it because saving everyone else in the universe is apparently worse than just letting one guy die. Fuck you, Miles, you selfish cunt. The rest of the movie is just him getting sent to the universe his spider came from and ends on its cliffhanger. Okay, it's fair to say the plot and pacing aren't the best, but how are the individual characters, I hear you thinking? First off, don't interrupt, it's fucking rude. And B, I'm getting to that.
Yeah, and you're supposed to be dumpster diving for ham scraps, you six-piece chicken McNobody! Get out of my seat!
For a movie that is so focused on its colorful cast of characters, using them as major parts of the marketing and plot, it's unfortunate to say that as far as characters go, they're generally shallow, one-note, and only seem to fill small or irrelevant roles in the story. which end up just dragging the movie down as a whole. If the movie stayed with just the cast from the first movie, building on and around those characters, maybe this issue could have been avoided. One of the first new variants we're introduced to is Jessica Drew, or at least this version of Jessica Drew, who is, from what I understand, the original Spider-Woman. And for some reason in this, they decided that she needed to be race swapped. And right away, Gwen looks up to her seconds after she appears, treating her as some sort of idol or example to look up to, but actively mocking and disrespecting Miguel, who seems to be the only person that takes anything serious, especially when it comes to anything multiverse related. And even in this one scene, he's the only one who is actively working to fight the Vulture, and for some reason they decided that they needed to justify having Jessica Drew show up in this by making Miguel basically need help right away because somehow he's competent enough to be the leader of this entire organization, but not enough to take on one guy by himself. And it's only once something has gone wrong because the others have messed up in some way or another do they take anything seriously, especially Jessica. In regards to Jessica as a character, she's effectively not even in the movie. She only shows up to dump exposition, make quips, or be Gwen's effective mentor who is either disappointed with her or has to remind her that she has some sort of responsibility. She doesn't even use her powers very often. I think she only uses them twice, maybe 3 times. And every time she does, it's just to pull her motorcycle closer to something. Because for some reason, they give her a motorcycle and she can't seem to be involved in anything that requires actual effort if she's not on her motorcycle. I wish there was more to say about her, but she's such a nothing character. None of her actions have any real significance aside from inducting Gwen into the organization to get her away from her father when he's trying to arrest her. She doesn't have a personality, she's just there as a tangential member to fill in scenes. The only thing we know about her is she's a terrible mother because she endangers her unborn child needlessly.
Who the fuck are you?
Spider-Punk is defined by his Cockney accent and his belief that being a hypocritical contrarian somehow makes him cool. He's mainly used to make Miles think Gwen has a boyfriend and pretend like he doesn't care about anything while dedicating his time and effort to fighting people he deems as fascist or hanging around helping other people who work with Miguel to make sure that the can stays intact. Almost everything out of his mouth is about how cool he thinks he is or how he criticizes / mocks anything and anyone because they care about something instead of fawning over how cool he is because he doesn't care about anything supposedly. The only time he's not doing that is when he's walking in front of Miles, forcing Miles to pay attention to him by bombarding him with very personal questions and making random comments to Miles so that he can call something propaganda while admitting he doesn't know what he's talking about. The most punk-like thing about him is being purposely unhelpful. If you took him out of the movie, the only thing that would change is the detail about Miles using his palms was to get out of the little laser cage when he actually uses his lightning powers. And even if that was removed from the movie, there's nothing stopping him from just powering up his powers when he uses it to achieve the same outcome. It's just a tiny detail to call back to what he told him beforehand to pretend like he somehow taught him, to show that Spider-Punk, or at least someone else in the group, is actually teaching Miles something. And aside from that, the plot actually is set up completely without his involvement whatsoever, and he ends up just leaving the movie halfway through.
What did you just say? Shy, D-Chai means D, bro. You're saying D-D. We're asking for a coffee in the room for green.
Shut the fuck up, street. Spider and his entire character boils down to, look how Indian I am. That's it. His entire introduction is nothing but him talking about how Indian he is and how much better he is. The studio really took advantage of all these different characters, going out of their way to purposely pick either niche characters or race-swapped characters, while making fun of or belittling pre-existing characters that just so happen to not fit in.
The message.
After the introduction of Spider, he just ends up being an extra pair of hands for the action scene in his dimension. Out of these first 3, Jessica is the only character who doesn't exist to just prop Miles up. She exists mostly to be the mentor figure for Gwen, or to just be the person warning Gwen against helping him and bring him along into the entire story. And when Miles is taken to go meet Miguel, Spider doesn't even go with them. He just stays behind in his own universe and is gone for the rest of the movie. Everything involving him could have been removed or could have happened in any other universe that they went to, and there would be no effect on the story whatsoever. He doesn't even give Miles a helpful tip to become better at being his version of Spider-Man. He literally just shows up to create some new variant that they could market. He literally does not contribute to the plot.
Beta!
Peter in this exists to do what every OG Marvel character in the last 10 years has done. Whenever the new writer's favorite shows up, he just humiliates himself and builds up Miles, because Marvel is incapable of making new characters based around old characters that people actually like. So instead, they put their focus into this psyop telling you why you shouldn't like the original character because the new one is better in every way with no need for development or struggle of any sort. They have him wear this bright pink bathrobe the entire movie and be one of those people who won't shut up about his baby. He's not even jovial or upbeat about anything. Instead, he talks like he's one sentence away from crying his eyes out and just worships the very idea of Miles, going so far as to continuously put himself down just to make excuses for Miles. Peter is even over his fear of having kids now. You know, that thing that destroyed his marriage and changed his entire life in the process? Yeah, that's just not an issue anymore. In fact, he didn't even start raising his child because he had some change in his life that made him willing to take the risk. Instead, he had a kid because he met Miles, and somehow a random kid he met in the last movie, for the sole purpose of fast-tracking Miles into being ready to be a hero. That guy was so inspirational to Peter that he only became a father in hopes that his kid would be like Miles.
Beta!
Forget the whole being scared of responsibility, or even saying something like, if I brought a kid into this world and someone found out my secret identity, what could that mean for them? The entirety of his fear is just gone because Miles was so amazing that he somehow just changed Peter's entire outlook on life. I guess 15 or so years of being Spider-Man, saving people, living through his unique hardship, living with the responsibility that shapes him and his life in ways that he never envisioned, doesn't affect him as much as meeting some random black kid who is more concerned about being famous for taking over the legacy of Spider-Man rather than making his own legacy. They also make Peter an unbelievably bad parent as well. Having him bring his daughter with him while he's out being Spider-Man, because I guess Mary Jane being a mom who takes care of their child, or dropping the kid off at daycare, or any other option was just not possible. So Peter opted to bring his infant daughter with him to his superhero job where he is regularly shot at.
Okay.
Fuck this movie and fuck the writers for doing this to Peter.
Put a ticket in and make her name it gay!
Gwen is almost a character in this. She gets about as much screen time as Miles and does her own dedicated story moments, mostly revolving around either her dad or her potential relationship with Miles. She does seem to have the titular struggle Spider-Man tends to have in his stories, where she's balancing her responsibility of hero work with her normal life activities, very often making her conflicted about what she should do and what she wants to do. Very typical, nothing revolutionary. Unfortunately, her story also involves tearing down her version of Peter, making him a weak avatar of Soy, who is more jealous of her having powers and the respect gained from it, and opts to becoming the Lizard instead of just hitting the gym and working on himself like a healthy person would. And apparently, he never talked to Gwen about it or did anything that could have suggested that he felt this way. Instead, he just opted to go the extra mile to turn himself into a monster, because once again, this movie cannot help itself from just shitting on Peter, the very idea of his existence, regardless of what alternate universe he's being put into. This ends up just getting him killed and supposedly making Gwen reluctant to make friends or get close to anyone. But at the same time, she's very friendly and open with every other person, only really avoiding making moves on Miles because it puts her at risk of getting in trouble or breaking canon. There's no real negative side effect to having a personal relationship with Miles, who's supposed to be another version of Spider-Man. I mean, they make it very clear with their little talk on this overhang, where they talk about how difficult it can be to have these sort of powers and be able to talk to someone about it because so many other people don't understand, and they're clearly trying to build the connection between these two. But at the same time, she couldn't go like the extra mile just to say, hey Miles, here's the deal. The reason I didn't come back sooner was because of this, and that. Instead, it's just, she has to run around behind his back and do whatever it is she's doing to somehow stay within the confines of not being willing to get close to someone, but at the same time, being willing to get close to literally everyone else except Miles. She effectively just leads Miles along for the entire movie, either trying to make him jealous of her and Spider-Punk for supposedly dating, which they all but directly declare. The story also has her meet up with Miles to reconnect and set up this conflict with her wanting to try this relationship with him, but also doing her job with the canon, which Miles finds out about and seemingly forgets till the very end of the movie when the plot needs him to get mad at her to set up the next movie and whatever confrontation will come along with that. He even has a chance to directly call her out, but decides not to. I have a feeling this is going to be another thing that they just hand-wave in the sequel, because with how popular the series seems to be and how much the movie focuses on the dynamic between these two directly or indirectly, there's no reason to think that they won't have these two get together. And I suppose it won't be too terrible to have Miles forgive Gwen for whatever reason, because then they'll have to acknowledge that at least one of these people will have to acknowledge that they were being stupid.
I respect every single Spider-Man in here. Does that include me?
No, you fuck!
Miguel, my boy, my guy, the coolest variant and my personal favorite, is the only respectable and responsible adult in the entire movie, while still having the ability to be funny without resorting to either MCU dialogue or open character humiliation, even if it is in a hostile manner to someone else. For some reason though, at every turn, the movie seems to want you to hate him. He's treated as the villain for most of his screen time, but he doesn't do anything particularly villainous. He just doesn't like Miles because Miles keeps causing problems, and even after explaining it to Miles how what he's doing is dangerous, Miles decides to just ignore the warning because he thinks what he wants supersedes everything else. Now, to be fair, Miles didn't even know about the canon until Miguel explained it to him upon their first proper meeting, and even if he did, it does seem reasonable to think there would be more apparent consequences for his first disruption, but they wait till this movie to introduce the concept of the canon, so it's more just the writer's fault for not thinking this part through. We first see Miguel very early, where he's intercepting a variant of the Vulture in Gwen's dimension, and the movie wastes no time in making sure you know you're not supposed to like him. They have him make mistakes or slip-ups during the fight that he has no reason to be messing up, because he's clearly competent enough to run the whole organization, like I said before, and if he wasn't capable of being a Spider-Man, then someone else would be in charge, and he'd probably be an apprentice like how Gwen is Spider-Pregnant's apprentice. While everyone is fawning over Miles and doing whatever they want while working tangentially on the programs they're supposed to be fixing, Miguel is the only person who actively tries to fix the issues Miles caused, and rightfully points out that what Miles wants will kill billions of people and possibly kill literally everyone else in the Spider-Verse. Out of the central cast, he's the only adult who isn't either knowingly endangering their child or is making an active effort to do their job. Miguel doesn't care if what needs to be done is popular. He cares about saving people and making sure the world is right. He is the epitome of with great power comes great responsibility, and when he knows Miles is going to do something that will cause unimaginable damage, the movie treats him trying to prevent this as a bad thing, going out of its way to have Gwen call him and everyone else bad guys for doing what they signed up for. But they only become the bad guys when they kick her out for doing something they actively told her not to do because it would make things worse. When Miguel and Miles are fighting on the space elevator, this is revelation that Miles managed to outsmart or trick Miguel by leading the other variants away from their base, as if that matters somehow. I have no idea why the movie thinks that's a big deal. The only thing that comes from it is that Miles still has to go back to the base where he has to get past Spider-Bite and any other variants that might have stayed behind so he can get to the go-home machine. It's not like he teleports back or has a huge head start. It doesn't even take that long for Miguel to catch up. But what is stupid is they make Miguel dumb in this scene and try to have him rip through the laser cage instead of just moving above it and pulling Miles out. And they had to do it in this way because otherwise the sequel couldn't be set up and the story would just end here. All this compounded with the movie having Miles beating him in instances where there is no reason for Miguel to lose at all. The movie cannot let anyone be an actual problem or obstacles for Miles, because no matter the story, Miles is not allowed to be called out on how shitty he is, and he most certainly can't suffer the consequences. In fact, random people he only met that day are for some reason on his side, helping him no matter how stupid or immoral he is. And somehow, they try to twist it to make Miguel seem like the villain in this movie, when Miguel is the only person who is actively working to make things better. In this movie, Miguel is the hero, and Miles is the villain.
Miles, the black one!
Miles is just an asshole and a Gary Stu. Everyone besides Spot and Miguel likes him unconditionally for no reason whatsoever. Only Miguel calls him out for anything he does, while everyone else makes excuses for him. Spider-Bite lets him get away for no reason whatsoever. They had one whole conversation lasting maybe a minute, and when her boss comes barging in telling her to stop him, she decides she's on Miles' side for no reason whatsoever. She doesn't even know why Miles is running and decides he's in the right or should be helped for some reason. Miles' parents won't even actually try to discipline him. They let him get away with constantly missing class, being late to everything, and disappearing for hours at a time. Yet the best they can muster is an uncomfortable scolding at a party and only grounding him after months, if not a whole year of this sort of behavior. And even then, they just let him get away with it later on in the movie. Miles doesn't even worry that if he reveals that he's Spider-Man, that his dad might have to arrest him, or that he might face some sort of consequence for being, a vigilante. At least with Gwen's storyline, there was an actual risk that she might get in some serious trouble for being Spider-Woman. But for Miles, his only concern is, for some reason, that they might not love him in the exact same way. When that's the biggest concern you have as a teenage vigilante with a cop father, you're either a very low-scale vigilante with minimal risk, or you don't understand your situation whatsoever. Miles, in this movie, is exactly like he is in the comics. He is just given anything and everything he needs with minimal, if any, work whatsoever. Even with his new powers of invisibility and electricity, he never has to struggle to master them. He's just amazing right away. At least with other Spider-Men in their stories, there's a learning period, but instead, he's just either adept with it or completely mastered it by this point. And even with him as well, they end up going back to the same idea of we should just tear down Peter and everything he has and give it to Miles to build him up instead of writing an actual story around him as a character or as a version of Spider-Man. They couldn't even give him a different character for a love interest. The writers just took yet another aspect of Peter Parker's story and gave it to Miles. They had no problem giving everyone else except Spider-Punk their own significant other. They can't give him any actual struggle. They can't give him any sort of actual character progression, because that would mean he has flaws or challenges he has to overcome, and that doesn't gel with
The Message.
Miles even has the gall to say that he should be exempt from any form of personal tragedy, even if such exemption would run the risk of destroying not only his universe with all those he cares about along with it, but also risking every other universe simply because he doesn't want to have to deal with a real consequence. And even when he's disagreeing with his mom about college to attend, he frames it as if he can't do anything in his life and every aspect is being controlled, and reframe it into this whole everyone else is trying to live his life for him story, when she's not saying he's literally not allowed to have any input on it. She suggests it because it's closer to her and the rest of Miles' family, but for some reason he thinks they aren't studying the fields that he wants to study, as if somehow a college that's closer just won't have a physics department whatsoever. Miles, your parents just want you to be close so they can visit you. They aren't trying to puppet your life, and even if people were actually trying to decide his life for him, Miles doesn't have a story of his own to tell. He just wants Peter's life as Spider-Man without having to work for it, because he thinks life should conform to his whims. Miles is being handed a nearly perfect life, and that little bit of perfection he doesn't have makes it all unfair to him. Miles has a two-parent household, they own a fairly large New York apartment, they can afford to send him to private school, and are willing to pay for his college the entire way. He's not being abused, doesn't have any bullies, he's not poor, everyone seems to like him for some reason. He randomly got superpowers and just decided to take over Spider-Man's legacy with no backlash or scrutiny from the public at large, and he is being actively pursued by a girl he has a crush on. The closest thing to hardship that Miles has ever faced in his entire life is that his criminal uncle died while engaging in criminality. Miles is a spoiled, ungrateful little punk, and I despise him as a character. Fuck you, Miles. Miguel did nothing wrong. As of time of recording, there is no news for Beyond the Spider-Verse, other than it's going to be coming out in 2027. And based on what I've seen through this movie, and what I can remember from the first, I doubt it's going to be anywhere near as good as people think it is. I highly doubt people are going to just all of a sudden not like this series, as the people who seem to be interested in it seem to be extremely interested in it. But it is my firm opinion that this movie is about as messy as most Marvel movies have been for the last couple of years. I don't see it getting better in the future. Thank you for watching. Oh man, this guy's so handsome and cool. I want to subscribe.